All right, another episode of the Square and Compass podcast. I'm very happy to be back doing podcasts once again. So much of the focus of this has been on this channel has been on live streams. So it's wonderful to be back once again doing a long form interview, this time with worshipful brother Kim March. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
No, it's my pleasure, and we should both, I suppose, really thank Martin Fox of Lewis Masonic, who was kind enough to set this up to send me your information.
Yeah.
He's doing some incredible work. So thank you, Martin Fox. Thank you, Lewis Masonic, for setting this up. But how's it going? How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, apart from the weather forecast here in the UK, which is 35 consecutive days of rain, is what we have to look forward to. I hope it's a little kinder out where you are, Cameron.
No rain, but lots and lots of snow and very cold at the moment. So
Oh,
we're both dealing with some super fun weather.
well, thankfully we're indoors now, so in the warm
This
and dry.
this podcast would have been very different if we were doing this outdoors on both of
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
ends, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I read through your biography,
Mhm.
which is available on Lewis Masonic. I'm going to go through it quickly here as well, but I am going to leave a link also, so people can check it out for themselves, as well as a link for your works, for your books, which you can order through Lewis Masonic. You can also order them through Amazon as well if you'd like, but Lewis Masonic, they are available. And really, we're here to talk specifically about, I suppose, I was going to say a Master Mason's friend, but truly, we're here to talk about the trilogy, right? We're here to talk
Yeah.
about all three of those books that you wrote, which is kind of meant to be a friend, almost like a friend and guide to a Mason as he goes through the three craft degrees, from when he's a new Mason through to Fellowcraft, through to Master Mason. In a very real sense, it's giving them a friend to carry with them, right? You can carry in your pocket, which is quite
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's
but
going
you,
back to the tradition of your proposer either being a relative or a very close friend who you see in person quite often, who mentors you through those three ceremonies. Um, but things don't quite work like that nowadays for every brother who comes onto the square. And these books are just trying to fulfill that role. Um, the way I would describe it, Cameron, is as a metaphor. We probably in our lives skim stones on a pond or a lake somewhere, see how many bounces we can get. And the way I think of this is that Freemasonry, the three degrees, okay, so the stone does its first impact with the water. That's our ceremony of initiation. And then it rises up. And what happens is we go through the ceremony and then we've got a lot of questions. There's an uplift in interest. Um, what was the symbolic meaning of what I've just experienced? A whole host of questions. Sometimes, if we're blessed with a very good proposer who we see with frequency, we've got an on-tap source of knowledge and information. But quite often nowadays, that doesn't quite happen. And the question one asks is, how much time does a new brother spend in the company of an experienced brother between regular meetings? Here in the UK, or England at least, it's more often than not, it's a very little or nothing at all, which doesn't sit very well. Um, so going back to our skimming stones, you've got three impacts. Three times there's heightened interest in what's happened to me, what's going on. And quite often those things happen in an information vacuum. I mean, there are online resources a brother can turn to, but we're all spending so much time in the digital world. We need to sort of rewind back into the real world sometimes. Um, and this is what these books are trying to do. They're trying to replicate that missing friend um, who provides guidance and information and support and explains what has happened. Um, And it's trying to fill in any gaps that a brother might experience. Can you relate to that in your particular neck of the woods? Does that
Well,
resonate with you?
I mean, it's absolutely the case, right? That mentorship is an incredibly important part of the craft. And for better or worse, right? The time that a typical Mason has for the craft in general, including mentorship, right? It's getting is just less and less, I think,
Yeah,
certainly in 2026 compared to previous decades. And so I think having a book or several resources, but having a book like when you first joined the New Mason's Friend or the Fellow Craft Friend or the Master Mason's Friend, right? All of that, I think it has the value of, yeah, it's basically, it's not meant to, I'm sure you would agree, it's not meant to replace the mentorship mentee relationship because that's still incredibly important, but it is a recognition of the fact that for many of our brethren, including the more senior brothers who would take on a mentorship role, they have families, they have work, they have all the things that keep them from, that just make them busy, keep them occupied. And so you
yeah.
need more resources for that new entered apprentice, that new fellow craft, or that new master mason. And I think taking the time to create this trilogy is a recognition of that fact.
Well, it is. I mean, I discussed this at length with Martin Fawkes when 2018, would you believe, which seems a long time ago now. The 5 Minute Ritualist had just been published, and we were discussing the needs of new brethren and where the information gaps were. And that's what we identified, is that there is no substitute for human contact in Freemasonry. That's where it all happens. It's about to some extent escaping the digital world for a few hours to come together with kindred spirits who share the same values. Um, to park our troubles at the lodge entrance, cross the threshold into the warmth and body of the lodge, and just for a few hours enjoy one another's company and that form of escapism rather than some or digital entertainment alternative. So these books do not replace the human factor. They're there to aid and assist those who take on the mentoring role. And arguably, every brother of the lodge has a mentoring role to play. We should all be mentors. But within lodges, a brother is usually appointed to mentor a individual new joiner. So yeah, I think these books are there to assist the whole mentoring process. They are not the mentoring process holistically in itself.
Well, and you could argue they are there not simply or not exclusively to assist the new mason, the fellow craft, the master mason. They're
Mm.
also there as a lodge resource for the mentors as well, right? Because, for example, I know that one thing you did in the books is answered some common questions a new mason, a fellow craft, a master mason may have. So, giving even if the mentor were to read those books, that mentor, that worshipful master, whomever it might be, maybe then more prepared to answer questions that
Yeah,
they may get. Right? I think sometimes we forget that mentorship is kind of a two-way street. Right? It's not just the
yeah,
responsibility of the mentee, of the new brother, the new mason, to ask the questions. It's also responsibility of the mentor to actually have the answers, or at least know where the answers can be found. So even if he doesn't know it off the top of his head, he knows the resources that are available for that brother. And I think in that sense, it would make as much sense for a mentor to have a copy of these books as for the new brother himself.
well, I think that's right. And I think also time served in Freemasonry does not necessarily correlate to Masonic knowledge. Um, I mean, you get some brethren who attend who enjoy just really the social dimension and engage up to that point. Um, so if you like, they have a knowledge shortfall, and these books can help them, in a sort of catch-up mission. Um, so I think it's got something for everyone. Even the most experienced brethren who have seen some of these books say, "Well, there's one or two things in there I never even knew about." They go off and check them, Cameron, and I sit there anxiously waiting to see if they concur or not. I haven't had one yet that's really said, well, that's just completely wrong. Um, so I think there's something in these books for everyone, but they are obviously targeted to help new brethren find their feet on the square and fully engage with Freemasonry, because there's the risk is that, in the first year, you can come along to the regular meetings. If you don't engage, when it comes to renewing your membership, you're going to start thinking about, well, do I really want to be part of this? Um, Now, I know it's different methods of mentoring in different territories and provinces, etc. But we're all human at the end, and it's all about communication. So I'm just hoping these books will find that niche. Um, already in the UK, some lodges are buying the books. They're either gifting them to their brethren if they've got the funds to do it, or they loan them, or they resell them. Um, the important thing is the books get into the right hands at the right time.
So you wrote again the three books, right? The trilogy.
Mm.
Again, all available either individually or in a set on Lewis Masonic, right? The new Mason's friend, the fellow craft friend, the master Mason's friend. I'm curious, the process of writing these books. Did you write them progressively or sequentially in the same way that a Mason will go through his degrees? Did you try to mimic in the writing process, or did you rather just, if you discovered something, let's say about the master mason degree, you'd make a note of that and then you'd go back and discover something about an apprentice degree? What was the actual process like of writing this? Because if you're imagining these books as a literary friend or guide to the mason on his journey, I'm just curious how that informed the writing process itself.
Okay, well, my professional working background, I've produced a number of publications, sometimes books, for large consumer groups, most of whom weren't naturally reading books as part of their leisure activities. Um, and that sets up quite a challenge as to how you structure the book. So the way I approach these things is that there's an intimacy with friends. It's not just about sharing facts. You've got to communicate on three wavelengths, really, one of which is factual. The second one is practical, how to get things done. How are things done the right way in this particular situation? And then there's emotional, which is about how you feel about it. And so I looked at a method of writing that communicated on those three wavelengths. And by talking to new brethren, recent joiners, I made a note of the questions they were asking. And they're very similar to the questions I asked but didn't get answered largely when I was initiated. Um, and then I started to structure the needs around, well, what are the elements? So there's the questions, there's the experience of the ceremony itself and its symbolic interpretations, which is open. I think these things are open to interpretation. They're not sort of black and white issues. So I had to keep it flexible enough that the brother had his own oxygen to breathe and make his own determinations. Because you can't, in a book, teach somebody how to be a Freemason. That's got to come from within. You can only put some guide rails up. And then there's the ritual side of things. I'm a big believer in rote memory. I think it's a very healthy thing. All my research has pointed to the health benefits. Um, then we have the archaic language of the ritual, given it's over 300 years old. Um, and it's like learning a foreign language. If you start to learn ritual, you don't understand what the word means, it really does slow the memorization process down dreadfully. So there are all these issues and barriers. So I don't know what the situation is in your province, but if rote learning by memory, by rote, stopped in the 60s and 70s in the UK at school levels. Um, and I think that was a real mistake. So we're dealing with a generation of brethren who probably not actually memorized anything outside of the alphabet much by memory. So when they start rote learning, it's very disappointing because our brains are programmed to forget. So they think they've learned something, they come back 24 hours later, and of course, it's faded. And a lot just go, oh no, it's not possible, I can't do it. Whereas in reality, that's perfectly natural. You just got to manage expectations in that regard. So that's what this book tries to do as well, is encourage and support the ritual side. And also history. Not every brother's desperately interested in the evolution of Freemasonry over speculative Freemasonry over 300 odd years. And if you want to include operative Masonry, you go back even further. So I developed this idea of fast history, which is just like a chronological sequence, a paragraph on each event where you literally fly over these events. And if any of them hook your interest, then you can go onto Wikipedia or whatever historical source you want to pursue. Grand Lodge in England has its Solomon service, which you can go online and tap into as a Freemason. There are lots of sources of information. So this approach, this fast history approach, really is just a series of hooks to see if it hooks interest on any particular time, aspect, or event. And I include in that things like major inventions, because you have to give some sort of sense of social backdrop, what's going on geopolitically as well as just the key Masonic events.
I mean, I've always argued, and I do this on the live streams all the time, because I will talk about kind of economic trends in different countries, certainly in North America, where I'm most familiar with Freemasonry, but also sometimes global economic trends. I talk a lot about what's happening in Windsor. Uh, and my argument's always been and still is, you can't separate the condition of Masonry from the condition of the cities, communities, countries in which it's
Yeah,
located, or the lodges are located, right? And so you do, and that's true historically, that's true presently, that will always be true, right? That
yeah,
there is a correlation between the condition of a Masonic lodge and the economy within the town it's located in, or what's happening socially, or what's happening politically. I mean, these things all correlate to one another, and you see that historically as well as within
yeah.
modernity. So I think it's very valid to keep those in mind. When you were asking questions to candidates, or to, excuse me, new Masons, in the preparation for these books, for this trilogy, what are some of the what were some of the most common questions that you were asked, and it could have been, or that were brought to your attention? It could be specifically, or just more in general. Were there questions surrounding things like, were people curious about the history of Freemasonry, the meaning of words, like you mentioned, ritual? Were they
Yeah.
curious about, or other things, like in what general areas did you find the most curiosity?
The list of questions is actually quite formidable. But they all relate, generally speaking, to the ceremony itself. And also, you get broader questions of what is the purpose of Freemasonry? Well, what am I going to get out of this? What I think I've deliberately in the book, responding to this, tried to deal with Masonic life through two prisms. What can Freemasonry do for me, and what can I do for Freemasonry? I mean, they are two separate questions, but interlinked. So, I mean, I spoke earlier about memorizing ritual. Well, all the research I've ever seen that if you start memorizing text, it boosts your memory function. On the other hand, if you do learn ritual and participate in the ceremonies, you're contributing to providing ceremonies for the next generation of the upcoming generation of Masons. So it's that sort of what's in it for me, what's in it for the craft. And that's the way I've tried to deal with things. The symbolism, brethren, the new brethren are very interested in the symbolism. They really want to get into that and understand it. And that takes us back, way back in history. So I try and deal with that, not as within the question and answer section, but within the explanation of the ceremony. So we do a guided tour through the ceremony, step by step, and just try and explain the symbolism. I spend quite some time in the Master Masons Friends going through the symbolism of the point within a circle, because I think that is just central to the whole experience. And then we have to deal with the Hiramic legend, bearing in mind that the third degree is a later addition. So all those things, I end up with a massive, if you like, list of questions. And then I try and just sort of, well, I'm going to deal with that and as a question and answer. I'm going to deal with that within the ceremony. I can deal with that one because I've got a glossary defining all the archaic language in the ritual, and that answers that. And that's the way I've approached it. And by chunking the book into these different compartments, for someone who's not a regular reader, who doesn't sit down and read a book front to back in one or two sittings, it allows the brother to dip in and dip out. It's just chunked logically, hopefully logically, to facilitate that. I think that's important, that you try and structure something that pleases everyone most of the time.
It was very hard to do, as the old expression says, right? You can't please everybody all the time, but you can try your best.
Well, that's it.
The idea of asking questions, right? I think that's such a valuable discussion point. I worry that I've talked about this in the past, and I've done a little bit of research on this, right? When a Mason of any level of experience or rank, or I don't like the term rank, any office, any degree, any level of experience, whatever it is, when a Mason, I think, stops asking questions, that's usually a pretty bad sign for their future within Freemasonry. I think curiosity and open-mindedness are, especially curiosity, is a really important attribute to have and to foster. Because if a Mason comes to the point where he or she, right, I do want to mention that as well, Order of Women Freemasons, but I'll probably stick to he, just out of habit, although there is the Order of Women Freemasons as well, which I have great respect for and are very valuable part of the craft. But when a Mason stops asking questions because he feels as though he knows it all or has learned it all, there's nothing left to learn, I really feel that it's probably a very bad sign for his future within the craft, because it's usually around that time he starts to drift away from Freemasonry. I think trying to encourage and foster and cultivate that sense of curiosity and inquisitiveness within a Freemason is incredibly important. I mean, for a lot of people, that that inquisitiveness is why they join in the first place. They have questions about Freemasonry and they want to get answers. And we want to, to me, one thing I always try to remind brethren, especially older Masons, through this channel, is there's always something more to learn. There's always something you don't know.
Yeah,
Freemasonry has such a extensive history, and so it seems like extensive history around the world. Um, and it seems like you were really tried with these books, especially to tap into and encourage that questioning nature and that inquisitiveness, and to remind brethren not to let that light go dark, so to speak, not to let the light of
yeah.
inquisitiveness go dark.
I think Freemasonry is so complex, but um, there's always something else to learn. And there's also different levels of experience because you've got the sort of esoteric side of things, which is highly spiritual. Um, it's not every brother's destiny to go down that route, but it's there. So if we take the Master Mason's Friend, for example, it's two books within one. Because what happens when you've completed your ceremony of raising is that you're suddenly approached. You've got more Masonic friends than you had before the ceremony started, because you're being approached about joining the Royal Arch, joining another order, um, taking an office in the lodge. Will you want to progress to master? Is that your aim and ambition? And what happens is individually, brethren come along and ask an innocent question, but it has a compounding effect. If you get multiple inquiries all coming more or less at the same time, it applies pressure. But that's not contrived, it's not deliberate, it's just an unwitting factor. Um, so the Master Mason's Friend has a second element to it, um, which is whither directing your course, your future Masonic journey. And what this is, it maps out all the different pathways you might consider and look at. So it deals with the progressive lodge offices and the office of master. It deals with all the other support offices, the more administrative offices. It then goes on to explore Royal Arch separately as the completion of the third degree as we position it in England. Um, it then progresses on to, well, perhaps you have other services. So there are lots of committees, lodge auditors. I mean, and I try and list all those possibilities out. We then go on to for Youghal, provincial grand lodges, lodges overseas, territories overseas. We then go into Grand Lodge, and so there's this sort of pathway that's laid out for a brother to sort of look at and think, well, at the moment, these are the things that interest me. Otherwise, we just suddenly turn around. And the way I look at it is that there's this fantastic vista of opportunity. But whilst we're passing through the process of the three degrees, we've got our back turned to it. And as soon as we're raised, we can turn around and suddenly it's all there. And we've got brethren coming at us saying, how about this? How about that? So this element of the Master Mason's Friend just tries to give brethren a sort of a bit of a route map of what's possible for the future.
I I want to revisit a question I asked earlier. The process of writing the book specifically. I'm curious. Did you write the trilogy in sequence or in stereo? Like, were you writing? Did you complete and publish, or at least complete, let's say, the new Mason's Friend, and then begin on the Fellowcraft Friend, or were you kind of doing your research and your writings for all the
Right,
books at once, and then how did the actual sequencing of the
right.
writing itself take place?
Well, I largely wrote them in sequence, but I mean, inevitably, when you're researching in these areas, you come across something, you think, well, yeah, that belongs to the feather crafts. So, you know, I have a growing pile of notes for the fellow crafter than the master mason coming out of the research for the New Mason's Friend. But you have to discipline the mind when you're writing these books just to focus on the degree in question. And it's quite easy. I mean, it happened to me once or twice. I started drifting into um, perhaps expanding on King Solomon's Temple, when really territorially I felt that belonged to the second degree, where it becomes more obvious that that is the central metaphor for craft Freemasonry. And so, yeah, I wrote them in sequence. I focused on the degree in question, but when I happened on something interesting that's more that fitted to another degree, that I stockpiled notes.
How many notes did you have at the end of it? I'm sure quite a few.
I don't really want to go there because it's horrendous. The other problem is, of course, you inevitably come up with variations of opinion. Uh, the trouble is where there's no sort of factual foundation or source you can go and check and validate, and you're dealing with opinion, um, then you are duty bound to kind of, well, some brethren subscribe to that view and others this view and others that. So there's a bit of that has to go on. So, for instance, in the Fellowcraft's Friend, I proposed the question of, is this the most important degree, even though it's the shortest? Because for the simple fact, originally there was only one degree in the medieval guilds, and that was being made a fellow of the guild. I proposed that question, but then supply all the data to allow the reader to make their own decision. It would be wrong for me to impose an opinion as somebody who's guiding, if you like, through all the information. So that's quite a difficult discipline, because you inevitably encounter your own opinions and prejudices, which have to be set aside in the interest of being fair and even-handed with these things. Does that make sense to you? I mean, it's not easy.
No, it does. I mean, Freemasonry, right, by its nature, is, despite what some Freemasons will say, despite what a lot of people outside of Freemasonry think, it's always been open to interpretation. It's always been open to change depending on, for example, the whomever might be in charge of a particular area at the time, right? I mean, I can't think of his name now. Chevalier
Mm.
Andrew Raymond, right? When I talked about him a few weeks ago, and his 1737 oration, I think it was, linking Freemasonry to the Crusaders, which then became the Templars. That was his interpretation. I find it highly suspect of an interpretation myself, but
Mm.
nonetheless, I mean, it's one of those things where, yeah, Freemasonry's always been open to interpretation by various masters and grandmasters, and even Masons themselves, who have wanted to give their own interpretations of the craft.
Yeah.
And from a non-Masonic perspective, one of the biggest challenges is, I get this question all the time, right? They'll have read, right, famously or infamously, more and more lately, they'll have read Albert Pike, Morals of Dogma, and they'll take that as some type of Masonic gospel, or they'll know about Chevalier's, Andrew Raymond's uh, oration, and they'll take that as gospel. And trying to explain to them that no, that's not how, aside from the fact there is no centralized Masonic authority, Freemasonry is a decentralized governing body around the world, where every Grand Lodge has its exclusive jurisdiction. There is no single individual
No.
or Mason who can speak for the whole of the craft. You
Mm.
rather have to take different interpretations. And if you become a Mason and you put in the work and the study, you're in a better position to be able to recognize what's more likely, what's less likely, what's a more or less valid interpretation. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, though, so much of what Freemasonry is based upon different individuals' interpretations of the craft. And one of the one of the responsibilities of a mentor for many years, and I would say your books now are kind of taking up that role, is giving the new Masons the different interpretations, but also giving them the tools to recognize where those interpretations may be more or less valid, or what are some
Yeah.
of the critiques of those interpretations.
Yeah. I mean, the whole spirit of these books is sharing information, not telling somebody that this is right and that's wrong and this is my view and I've spent, months researching it, so it must be right. Uh, the world doesn't work like that, and it's wrong. Quite often you find, on the academic side of things, people have genuinely spent a lot of time researching, and their opinions become fixed. Um, and that doesn't really allow any oxygen for alternative opinions to be considered. So, at all costs, I've laboured hard to avoid expressing personal opinions. There is one element where I've shared, just to demonstrate how to interpret symbolism. I've given a personal interpretation of the point within the circle, just as a demonstration. And I just say quite openly, you can share that, or you can perhaps develop your own interpretation, but it's just illustrating, if you like, Freemasonry goes beyond the surface level. It's meant to inspire you to think and reflect. And that's another difficult mission to take on. Whether I've succeeded in doing that, time will tell. But um,
Well, Freemasonry by its nature is personal, right?
mm,
I've said many times that Freemasonry is about common experiences with personal interpretations or
yeah,
personal values, right? No, one of my favorite things to do is after a degree, speaking to the newly initiated, newly passed, newly raised brother, and asking him, what did you think of that degree? What stood out to you? What did you find interesting or fascinating? And then, as they are, let's say, being mentored on their proficiencies to move forward or to progress, every now and then asking them, what does this word mean to you? What does this lecture mean to you? Trying to get them to give me
yeah,
their personal interpretation, which might very well be completely different from my interpretation of the word or of the lecture. And
mm,
right, that's one of the reasons why Freemasonry, despite what some people say, I've talked about this plenty of times, is neither a religion nor a cult. One of the things that differentiates it is within a religion. I'm not knocking religion. It's to be Freemason is believe in a supreme being. But one of the reasons that separates Freemasonry from religion is within a religion, there is usually a standardized interpretation that's given to you from
yeah,
the priest, the imam, the rabbi, the spiritual leader, right? It's like this is the work and this is what it means. And you have your services where you have the qualified individual, like rabbi means teacher, right? Explaining
mm,
what this means.
yeah,
Within Freemasonry, like you said, it's not even the worshipful master, even the district deputy grand master. It's not his responsibility to tell brothers what the ritual, what the ceremonies means.
mm,
Every Mason needs to discover that for themselves. And that's why very often, right? Um, that's one of the points I always bring up when people will tell me Freemasonry is a religion. uh, my usual argument to point out it's not. There are others as well you can use for sure. But my main one is the fact that Freemasonry not only allows, but if it's being done right, encourages individual interpretations and individual understandings
yeah,
of what it means. There's obviously just rote facts. Premier Grand Lodge of England formed June 24th, 1717. which that's not up for debate. That's just a date when something
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
the definition, the understanding of the meaning of ritual, that is a very, very personal interpretation, which I think makes Freemasonry fun, right? That's one of the things I love about it, is that openness to different interpretations and different understandings. And if you're a master mason out there, if you're a worshipful master, if you've been around for 30, 40 years, ask a newer mason what he thinks of the ritual, how he interprets it. It might cause you to reflect on your own understanding of it and maybe reconsider.
Yeah, I mean, Freemasonry is definitely not a religion. It's not a cult. It's the philosophy of introspection, to my mind.
Good way to
It's
put it. I
about
never heard that definition before, but I like it.
it's about knowing yourself. And once you get to know yourself and all the strengths and weaknesses and idiosyncrasies and things, you're in a position to move forward. You're in a position to deal with the world in a completely different way if you did not know yourself, because you just sail through life. When you come to terms of knowing yourself, and I think Freemasonry is a very good medium for that to happen, and I'm very supportive of it, then I think things take on a whole new meaning. You begin to understand how the world operates around you. You become more reflective. You think more about what you're doing, what you're going to say, how you're going to deal with a particular challenge. Um, and I just think it just builds that inner strength. And you can go back to the ancient philosophers, and they all predicated their philosophy on knowing yourself. And in fact, the opening words on the title page of the Master Mason's Friend um, is know thyself.
It's yeah, and I like that. Again, I really like that definition. That's a good one.
Mm.
Philosophy of introspection, right? I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, every Freemason will have his own interpretation, his own definition, right? People have asked me what my definition of Freemasonry is. My usual answer, well, I have two answers. I will tend to give the, for lack of a better term, rote answer, right, which is a civic or community organization evolved from stonemasonry guilds. But if they ask me for more of the philosophy, it's usually my answer is the belief that the world can be made better through the application of brotherly love, relief, and truth. But that's for me, right? That doesn't mean everybody's going to agree with it, and that's again the beautiful thing about Freemasonry that I love so much.
Yeah.
The in terms of, and this is taking us way back to the beginning. I did want to take a moment to go through your biography, but specifically some areas within your biography, as noted on Lewis Masonic, that may apply to Freemasonry, or how you think they apply to Freemasonry. Either your Masonic journey or your work within Freemasonry, or maybe what others can take from Freemasonry, or give to, maybe a better way to put it. You were born in Hastings, East Sussex in 1955. Before your 22nd birthdays, you took up your first print media job. And
Yeah.
according to Lewis Masonic, taking that position up, it revealed within you an innate entrepreneurial drive, providing the impetus for a successful career in educational consumer publishing and allied marketing services.
Yeah.
To what extent do you think your innate entrepreneurial drive, to what extent do you think that affected your Masonic career? And how do you think an entrepreneurial drive can be used within a Masonic career or within Freemasonry?
Yeah. I think, I mean, the first, so I mean, during my working life, I was approached numerous times to come into Freemasonry, come onto the square. In fact, my office in London was just literally a 5-minute walk from United Grand Lodge of England in Great Queen Street. I used to walk past that building to go to business meetings, wondering what it was, because it's such an intriguing looking building. I did find out what it was about. But it's not until I moved up to Shropshire that I first came onto the square, I was approached and I thought, well, why not? I'm in a county, all new people, be a good way of making some friends, if nothing else. I did start to look into it, but I didn't want to spoil it because obviously you shouldn't go researching the ceremonies before you've experienced them. And I found the ceremony of initiation quite moving. And I just thought I had a whole load of questions. So I started to ask questions. And sometimes the answer was, give it 10 years, you'll understand what it all means. And I thought, yeah, but most people don't have 10 years to give before they make a decision about something. One of the more experienced brethren very kindly gave me a book, um, and it was a late Victorian book about Freemasonry, and the language was very floral. It would, and would drift off onto a different subject and then drift back on again. And I enjoyed reading it, and I learned a lot. And that I thought, do you know that my lodge I joined, my mother lodge, hadn't had a candidate in 4 years. And I thought,
Longmynd Lodge number 4877.
yeah, yeah. And I thought, at this rate, there's a risk they might not have another one for another 4 years. So I went to the master of the lodge. There is two lodges. There's a mother and daughter lodge meet in the same building, and me and a member from the daughter lodge, we said, why don't we write a welcome manual for new members, just to break the ice, give them a bit of Masonic history, but not overly overdo it. And that's what we did. With the blessing of the two lodges, we produced this manual. So it even had letters from the master, the wardens, one or two of the other officers introducing themselves, just one page, and it just explained what their role in the lodge was in a paragraph. And then that was a welcome letter that was signed and went into each manual each time a new brother came onto the square. And it even had invitation cards for inviting a visitor. It was quite a lot to it, but not heavy. It wasn't, here's 50 pages of Masonic history. Here's 2 pages summarizing it. And it was that Martin, after the 5-minute Ritualist memory system was published, I was talking to Martin. He said, have you written anything else for Freemasonry? And I said, well, only this welcome manual. He asked for sight of it, and he said, the writing style is just right for this mission, to write for new brethren. And I thought, really? But I felt the drive to write that welcome manual based on my experience. I'm not saying, it's not being critical at all. It's just, I think the brethren just didn't really know how to cope with a new member coming in because they not had a great experience of it. I mean, one candidate in 4 years, things go rusty, don't they? So, I mean, I just saw an opportunity and thought I can perhaps, based on my experience as a new incomer, do something positive to make it easier for future brethren. And that was the motive. And the lodge went along with it and it was produced. So there was happiness all around. People, brethren, could see the benefit of doing this. And if you like, that was the spark. Little did I realize it at the time that nearly 18 years later would be the spark for the Friends series of books, but it was the catalyst.
I mean, you never know what it can take. 18 years. It can take, it can take 80 years, right? I mean, it's amazing how often, because Freemasonry is very long lived. And part of what that means is, and there's a metaphor here that connects to our stone Masonic brethren, our operative brethren from back in the day, right? An entered apprentice can have an idea and write it down and give it to the worshipful master, and it gets filed away in the lodge office somewhere, never to be seen again until 30, 40, 50 years. There's a whole new set of officers, a brand new collection of Masons. They're going through the office and they come across that note, and then they decide to maybe implement it or take it up, right? Just because an idea even in one's lifetime is not um, uh, utilized doesn't mean it never will, and doesn't mean it's still not valuable, right? I'm always suggesting to entered apprentices and to newer Masons, if you have an idea, bring it up in lodge. Maybe the idea won't go anywhere in that moment. Maybe it will be
Yeah.
maybe they'll be emotional, get voted down, whatever. I mean, these things happen. We're a democratic organization for a reason. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a value in bringing the idea forward. Doesn't mean that the idea won't end up being used, again, down the line. I've personally experienced many times where I've been in our record books, I've been in our offices, came across a note, something in the minutes where a brother brought an idea up or tried something, it didn't work, and you try it again, right? A few decades down the line. So, in your case, 18 years, in some ways, when you consider the span of
Yeah.
Freemasonry being over 300, 18 years from initial spark um, to the fire itself or to the completion, that's not so bad.
No, no. I I mean, the actual writing of the three books was 7 years, which has some sort of Masonic resonance. The seven, the number of completion. Um, I feel as if I've actually served a stonemason's apprenticeship. There are, it's something you keep chipping away at to try and make perfect. And of course, there's no chance in the mortal sphere of making something perfect, but you can give it your best shot. Yeah.
Well, I mean, seven is funny. Seven is just an important number, just in general, right? Not even within Freemasonry. It's funny how
Mm.
often the number seven, seven deadly sins, seven ancient muses, seven liberal arts and sciences. It's funny how often seven is just an important number in general. So there you go. So you were doing well Masonically there.
Yeah.
The Also within your Lewis Masonic biography, right? It mentions you consider yourself, or you are a self-confessed creative thinker.
Mm.
Um, the value, what do you think the value of creativity is within Freemasonry or within your Masonic experience, especially considering that very often I think creativity is an overlooked value or an overlooked attribute within Freemasonry. There's very often this idea, even amongst some Masons, right, that there's one way to do Freemasonry. It's this way, whatever this way might be. And creativity is not welcome, and creative people need not apply. So, as a self confessed creative thinker, creative person, how has creativity been of value to you in your Masonic journey?
Um, well, I think it makes me think more deeply about some things. I mean, you can't think deeply about everything you experience. Um, so these books are a product, if you like, of that thinking. That I mean, I gave you the metaphor of the stones being flat stones being skimmed across a lake. I quite like metaphors. I think they're very good from a communication point of view, getting something reasonably complicated over in a concise form. So creative thinking in Freemasonry, I think, helps solve problems because there are, it's like the world over, isn't it? There are people who just go along with things, and there are people who innovate and try and make things better or improve things, or look at things and say, well, could we come at that from a different direction? Um, and that's how I look at these books. I look and see a need. I see a need. I see someone who's been initiated, got lots of questions, as I had when I was initiated, but you can't get the answers, or it's difficult to get answers. um, so you've got to come up with something that provides the answers. You've got to try and innovate. And it's that sort of thinking. So if you look at the Master Mason's Friends cover, it's images of the Rainbow Mountain, which is a Peruvian Andes, with all these different coloured rocks and sediments. And sublime, what's the word sublime mean? It means you've taken to the edge of consciousness. So this landscape is surreal. It's almost as if you have been taken to the edge of consciousness. So then I take an image and I notice in the foreground there are 4 steps. So I think, So step number 1, you're coming from the darkness of non-Masonic world. Step 1, initiated. Step 2, fellow craft. Step 3, Master Mason. And then there's the option of going on to Royal Arch, which in the United Grand Lodge of England is the completion of the 3rd degree. And then you start looking at the vista. So you get this beautiful multicolored ridge, which I saw as the progressive offices leading to the office of Worshipful Master. And then there are paths coming off round the side, which are the support offices, Lodge Secretary, Director of Ceremonies. And then there's a wonderful valley, the valley of other opportunities. That could be serving a lodge committee, it could be serving helping to manage a Masonic building, getting involved with the social side. There's a whole raft of possibilities down that valley of opportunity. And then in the distance, we have looming a mountain point, a summit, which serves as Provincial Grand Lodge, and beyond that, an even higher summit, which is the United Grand Lodge of England. And I just take that image and I apply that interpretation to it. Whether it helps or not, I don't know. That's not for me to decide. That's for the reader to decide. But I just feel that gives a visual map of what the opportunities are, the avenues of opportunity, the pathways that could be followed post being raised to the sublime degree of a Master Mason. And it's that creative thinking I inject into these books. And sometimes I come up, it's like, there are good ideas and there are bad ideas and there are daft ideas, and I'm capable of producing all 3. But
sometimes bad ideas end up being good ideas as well, right? You got to it's the brainstorming idea, right? The brainstorming phase, there are no bad ideas, because even theoretically a bad idea can very often spin into a good idea, right?
Yeah.
There's usually some type of, at least in my experience, within a bad idea, there's usually a grain of at least a valid point or a valid idea hidden in there. And it's true for the opposite way as well, right? Usually within a very good idea, there's usually at least a few pitfalls that if you're not careful as you try to implement these good ideas, you might end up going down, you might fall into one of those traps. So I think ideas, and I think, creativity, if nothing else, if a lodge is struggling, and many are in 2026. So in fairness, there's always probably been throughout history struggling lodges. If they're not willing to be creative in looking for solutions to whatever their struggles may be, I think they're shortchanging themselves, because clearly, if they've found themselves in a not so good spot, creative thinking is probably required at a certain point. So I think creativity within Freemasonry is something we need to encourage. And so I'm glad that it seems that your efforts have been, amongst other things, to encourage that creativity.
Yeah. I mean, I think Freemasonry probably in the Western world has a challenge. You get views of, well, we need to modernize. And you go, well, we're very much rooted in tradition. How do you modernize a 300-year-old tradition? And so you get suggestions coming up like, we should do away with the ancient ritual and just update that, rather like they've done with some of the Shakespearean plays. They put them into a modern context and modernize have modern current language, which is all right as an experiment, but I'm not sure that's the solution. I think what we have to do for younger brethren now to bring more younger men and women onto the square is to make it relevant to them. And by that, I mean, here in the UK, scientists have been measuring happiness in the population since 1990. And it's a piece of scientific-based research. And so they've started measuring happiness from 1990, and every year since then, happiness has declined. And when you look at the commentary that goes with these statistics, they go, well, there are two major factors that have had an influence. One is social media, and the other one is, in this country, we had lockdown periods for COVID where people were isolated for long periods of time. That really damaged the craft in this country. I don't underestimate how much damage was done by that.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Did the lockdowns damage the craft, or did the response from brethren to the lockdowns so what I mean by that is we had lockdowns here in Canada as well, and they did it also in the States. And I mean, I'm sure I don't know exactly which countries did and did not have lockdowns. I can speak for the experience here within Canada, within Ontario. We had several lockdowns. I believe we were probably equivalent to the number of lockdowns in the United Kingdom, is what it looked like to me. And obviously during that time, Freemasons, right, we could not meet in person as well. We did switch over to virtual, but this goes back to this idea of creative thinking. It seemed like there were still a lot of opportunities to do some really cool things during that time period, just to the extent to which Masons want to take advantage of them or not. Yeah. Like one thing we did in my lodge, we did a few different versions of it, but we did a virtual beer and cheese tasting, where we went to a local business, which itself was struggling due to the lockdowns. They couldn't have people in. They became a purely takeout business. But we went to this local business. It was like a local brewing company, great company, really great organization. And we had them create packages of, or we ordered from them packages, and they put in 3 different types of beers that they had produced, like locally. Then they created packages of meats and cheeses. They put in some keychains and pins and stuff there as well. And then if you were a Mason or a member of the lodge, or even a visitor who wanted to learn more about Freemasonry or take part, you could order the package. It was either be delivered to you, or you could pick it up. And then we had a virtual meeting where the brewing company actually was part of the virtual meeting with us, and the person who brewed the beers and who did all the, I don't know what you call it, not chef, but whoever is responsible for making beers, I don't know what the term is. Like, he went through the tasting. He said, okay, beer number 1, it's labeled A. Take out the meat and cheese in the package marked A. This is how we brewed the beer. This is how it tastes. This is why we picked the cheese and the meat. And he went through each one. And if you didn't drink, like I didn't, we had different packages created for you so you could take part. But the point is, like, that's something you can do, right? One of the things that, and I'm going to call my Masonic brethren out a little bit on this, I suppose, when it came to the lockdowns, I really feel like a lot of Masons just went, oh, for lockdown, there's nothing that we can do until it finishes. It's like, no, there's a lot that you could do. You have to be willing to put the work in and be creative. and think about things differently. Like when I first proposed the beer and cheese tasting, or a lot of Masons were like, well, how can you do that virtually? How is it possible? You can't pour beer through
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
camera. And it's like, well, there's a way. You just got to be creative. So I guess, when you say, certainly the lockdowns hurt a lot of people, I don't want to underestimate them, but I also think there were opportunities to do some really cool stuff there that maybe we in Freemasonry, in a global sense, did not take advantage of.
Well, there speaks a fellow creative thinker, if you don't mind my saying. I mean, that's exactly, the workarounds we have to do. But I think there are some generic opportunities with younger brethren. I think the positioning is we're now beginning to see, I think, certain aspects of social media have got to a tipping point where they're doing more bad than good. And we're beginning to see that now in European countries. Australia has already banned social media for children. I think the UK is going to be doing that, and there are other European countries that are going to go down that road. And I think personally is that we're spending too much screen time and not enough real world time, if I can put it that way. We're living our lives in two worlds, the real world and the digital world. The digital world offers escapism. So does Freemasonry. It's we can enter the lodge, leave all our troubles and woes at the door, come in and just celebrate the human state. Um, Using our three founding principles. Um, I think that's the positioning we have to offer to the upcoming generations, is that this provides you with an in-person respite from all the tough challenges we're facing out there in the digital and real world. And if we can find a way of communicating that and the way we feel, the way I describe it is that if humans had a battery, if we were powered by battery, we go to a Masonic meeting, the batteries run quite low since the last meeting. But when we come out, it's fizzing, it's fully charged, we're ready to go again. And I think that's what we've got to start trying to communicate, along that sort of wavelength. I don't know if that makes any sense to you,
Yeah.
Cameron, but um, I think we've got to make it relevant to the new generation. And I think there are some young people now who are beginning to look for that. We've got an upcoming generation who's not big on alcohol. They're not big on, going out to alcohol-based parties and experiences. They're looking at their diet. They're looking at their health. Well, eventually they'll start to look at their mental health and question, the amount of time they spend in the digital world, and perhaps come back and we can get them back into the Masonic real world.
I mean, I've talked about a lot of these things. I think you're absolutely right. I think the key is relevance. Making Freemasonry relevant to its membership and to the community at large is
Mm,
a way to try and to deal with some of the problems that is being faced by Freemasonry.
yeah,
Again, in the Western world, I don't want to imply that in other parts of the world, Freemasonry doesn't have its issues and problems as well. It has its problems everywhere because every organization has problems just by
yeah,
the nature of existing in the world. Nothing is ever going to be without problems or issues or concerns. And also, nothing is ever going to be without bright spots and successes. And Freemasonry has a lot of those as well. But certainly, I think within the Western world, you are seeing that the relevance of Freemasonry to the typical community member
mm,
and even the typical Masonic member is declining.
mm,
And if we can develop those relationships, because ultimately relevance is relationship, we can, I think that takes it a long way. And a big part of relevance, again, is taking the time to research, to know what it is you're a part of, to get your questions answered, to know
yeah,
how to get them answered. And that seems to be really what you've done with this trilogy. Um, Now, I understand. I was curious. The books are offered both as a set, all three. You can purchase them together, or you can purchase them individually. I'm not sure if you know this or not. I understand, right? It's primarily being sold through Lewis Masonic, but also it is available on Amazon. Are most individuals purchasing the set together, or do you find that the individual books are being purchased?
Well, they weren't launched simultaneously, so the New Mason's Friend was launched well during a COVID lockdown, ironically, about 6 years, 5 years ago. Um, so they've been launched in stages, but of course, it's not until you complete the trilogy that you get that boost of interest, and we recognise that. Um, so what I understood from Lewis Masonic is that every third order they had for these books was the trilogy, one in three. It's possible there are other brethren out there who, over the recent times, have bought each copy as it's come out and then are just completing the trilogy. So it's very difficult to read it at the moment. But the idea is that lodges and those brethren concerned with Masonic education, and you know what, this could really help us. It could be incorporated into our mentoring mix. You don't have to buy a book for each brother. You can use it almost like a library service and loan them a book. Perhaps give them the option of buying it if they want to keep it as a source of reference. So time will tell whether this succeeds or not. But we are battling against apathy as well. And I think that's where the creative side comes into things, is that the foe is apathy, and it's about positive actions that eventually will quell apathy and put it in its place, which doesn't really belong in Freemasonry, that's for sure.
Positive actions is it's like we're talking about, right? A positive action today that doesn't, or an action that you take today that doesn't seem to lead anywhere, and so you question whether it was positive or not.
Mm.
Again, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, someone else learns of that idea, however it is that they do, and then it takes off. So just I think, yeah, taking that action is so important because you don't know where it will lead. And I think that's really, really a really important thing to keep in mind. Um, as you know, I think as most people watching this will understand, Freemasonry and our Masonic rituals are not the same everywhere. It's one of the
No.
beautiful things about it. There's common themes, common understandings, while at the same time, again, different jurisdictions develop differently. They have different histories.
Yeah, yeah.
Having said that, in your experiences, outside of, well, I guess I'll ask this in two parts. First, in terms of just outside of the United Kingdom itself, how much interest has there been for the trilogy, for the Friend trilogy? Are you finding books being ordered in America, Canada, around the world, Africa, Asia?
Uh, I I don't know the answer to that question. That's something obviously Martin will know. Um, but I do believe there's overseas interest in the books. And even if somebody goes, do you know what, this isn't entirely suitable for the way we do things, I hope it will inspire someone to write something that does the job in the right place. There's no, um, I mean, my reasons for doing this is quite simply to give new brethren a helping hand. And when I started on this mission, I said to Martin Folks, he said, we thrashed out this broad idea of these three books. And I said, well, who are you going to get to write them? I said, because I don't know. I haven't got the knowledge base to write these. He said, well, no, but you're going to go away. You're going to reimagine the ceremonies, and then you're going to have X number of months to research and produce the book. He said, that way it will come across as somebody who's genuinely sharing something, because the trouble with learning is you form opinions and attitudes and they become entrenched. And at all costs, We just wanted to keep this in the purest sense as sharing information and not telling brethren how to think and what to do. Um, and
And
it's
there would
just,
be, certainly like you said too, there would be, and hopefully this does inspire, because you could take the Friend trilogy and easily create, well, not easily, I don't want to downplay it, but um, I guess the idea is easily transferable. There obviously will be work that goes into actual research and writing and producing, but the idea itself is very easily transferable onto Preston Webb ritual, or
yeah,
onto the Swiss ritual, or what, like
mm,
Swiss rites or whatever, or Prince Hall
mm,
for that matter, right?
yeah,
Which you could easily take this idea
yeah.
and apply it. And obviously, the work itself, like you said, it was 7 years. I think you said you spent researching and writing to
Yeah, I
complete.
tried to fit some life in around that as well
Yeah,
because,
as you got to, as you have to. It's
yeah,
sometimes you have to fit Freemasonry around your life. Sometimes you fit your life around Freemasonry. But I think it would be really cool. And again, this may not happen anytime soon, but maybe a few decades down the line, to actually have a kind of a library collection where you have, I suppose we could call yours Emulation Ritual, Friend
mm,
Trilogy. Then you could have Preston Webb
yeah,
trilogy. You could have a Prince Hall trilogy. You could have a Swiss trilogy. I mean,
yeah,
it would be really interesting to see the variety of different trilogies you could. I mean, Order of Women Freemasons. Like, it'd be really interesting to see the number of different trilogies you could create within this context, because, and again, to have different brethren read it, right? I would, because we have recognition in Ontario with Prince Hall, Ontario. I would love to read a trilogy set talking about the Prince Hall rituals,
mm,
and their history and how they did. It'd be really so, and the history of Prince Hall. Obviously, I'm somewhat conversant in it, but I could always learn more, as we talked about. There's
yeah,
always
yeah.
more to learn. So
Well, I mean, this has changed me as a Mason because I've acquired so much knowledge. I mean, if only I could remember everything I've researched, that the brain doesn't quite work like that, does it? But so occasionally I find myself going into my own book to get to remind myself what the answer to something is. Um, but it has changed me. I've come to see it's deepened my philosophical understanding of what Freemasonry is trying to achieve. And you almost to the point, and it's impossible that you try and get your head into your mind into the head of the originators, who created the third degree ceremony, what were their thought processes. And well, we'll never get an answer to that, but it's an interesting exploration. I find it interesting anyway, just to,
I could be wrong, and again, because we don't have an answer for sure. My assumption was always it was Anderson and Sayer who created the third degree. It was always my guess.
mm,
Um, the first Grand Master of the Premier Lodge, that was Anthony Sayer, from remembering correctly, or Sawyer. No, Sayer,
oh
Sayer.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and Anderson of the Anderson Constitutions. By the way, my favorite paragraph ever written about Freemasonry is the Anderson Constitution section concerning God and religion. But my assumption is it was always kind of those two, along with others who kind of. It wasn't just. I don't think there was any like single or two authors, but I assumed it was those two who kind of developed it. I could be wrong, but that was always my assumption.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do, Anson. I won't go into it now, but I'll email you a paper. It won't take you very long to read it. It's very well written, and see if that sheds some light for you on who is the originator or author of the third degree ritual. It's neither of the two brethren you mentioned.
Well, then there you go. So there's always something new to learn. So
There is. But I'll email you the paper and you can have a look at it.
very cool. I think with that, we're just about finished. I'm going to remind
Yeah,
everybody again, please. I'm going to leave some links in the comments, or in the description to this video. So check
yeah,
out Worshipful Brother March's biography, but more importantly, even than that, either for yourself in your Masonic journey or for your lodge, if you have a library, not even a library, if you have a bookshelf where you have some books kind of stored, consider purchasing. I would suggest a trilogy. To me, it's the best value, instead of ordering them separately. And again, at least you've got them. And then yeah, have them for yourself, have them for your lodge. You can use them as gifts to new Masons, to fellow crafts, to master Masons, or like a library system, like Worship Brother March mentioned, right? You can lend them out to your new candidates. And even if you've been a Mason for 50 years, uh, don't think there's not still some pretty decent information in these books as well. Don't assume you know everything, because I promise you, you do not. You can be a Mason for 100 years, 200 years. There's still more to learn. So check these books out as well. But I did want to ask you this question, and you did kind of touch on it earlier, but I figured I'd make it a more specific question. Right? I've been calling this the friend trilogy. The new Mason's friend, the fellow craft friend, the new Master Mason's friend. How would you define a friend?
Ah, a true friend. I think this is part of the problem, is that the word friend has been redefined by social media and diluted to acquaintance level at best. But a real friend is someone who will watch your back, and if something awful happens, they'll be there to support you come hell or high water. And I think Masonic friendship, not everyone can be your best friend, but it is a perfect medium for finding really good friends. And I think as a collective, because of our charitable disposition, our subscription to brotherly love, true friendship means we support one another. And that's what's missing in our society. We're becoming a society of disconnected strangers. You know, and I think that's one of the key virtues of Freemasonry, is that it brings us together as kindred spirits. And you can always, whenever you walk into a proper Masonic lodge room, you can sense the warmth as you walk in. Um, and that is simply an amazing experience.